This is The Right Approach. I'm JW Judge, and with me is my co-host, Barbara Hinske. This is a podcast for writers to learn more about the craft and business of writing as we explore a new topic every week. And this week, I think we'll start off talking about business for sure, especially on your end, and then talk about craft as our topic. This week is our writing influences and developing your author voice, that I think a lot of times starts with who it has influenced you, and as you do your own writing kind of evolves from there. But let's start with what projects we have going on as we record at the end of August. So Barb, let's start with you. I know you've got a lot going on.
So I'm not writing anything right now. I'm just promoting the heck out of the movie, the Hallmark Movies and Mystery Channel movie, based upon my novel Guiding Emily. Movie fortunately has the same name. I like that. And I'm now podcasting, and I've managed to do 500 individual emails to virtually everybody I've ever met, to ask them to share the word and to tune in. And that applies for the whole month of September. Hallmark republishes things. It's not a one and done for them. And so if there's enough trending on Twitter or enough viewings on all of these showings, then they're going to make it into a recurring TV series, which is what I certainly want, the actors and directors want. And I think the visually impaired community, because the book is about a woman who loses her eyesight in an accident, and a puppy that becomes a guide dog. And it's the love story of them coming together and going forward in their life, which is not the typical Hallmark love story, but it is definitely a heartwarming love story. So we're just marketing the heck out of it and hoping everybody tunes in and watches Hallmark Movies and Mysteries Guiding Emily. Check local listings. So that's what I got.
In addition to that, that initial airing, you just told me it's going to be streaming on Peacock too. Is that right?
Yes, it's going to be on Peacock. Yeah. And it is audio described for the visually impaired, which is kind of a big deal. And in my own, I live in Phoenix, Arizona, so you would expect I would have a bigger reach in my local community because I'm known here. So a bunch of the big mega churches and big assisted living facilities and the private library where I first met Emily Main, who's the main character in this book, they're all hosting movie nights, which is really, really fun. And some of them will not be when it airs for the first time, will be later. So I'm going to be zooming around town, talking at movie nights. And the Foundation for Blind Children, who I donate half of my proceeds, royalties from Guiding Emily to, is having an intimate evening with me as a fundraiser on September 23rd. So I've got some stuff I've got to do for that. So fun stuff.
Yeah. So I know that, like you just mentioned all that stuff that's going on. You've also done some out of the box for what you normally do promotion to get the word out. That, I think, a lot of it is just because the nature of the visually impaired basis of the movie, it draws a lot of interest. And it's things that you wouldn't necessarily do for a book itself. But so tell us some of the stuff you've been doing.
Yeah. So, and because it also features a guide dog, and people love dogs in general, and guide dogs in specific. There's nobody on the planet, I think, who does not love a guide dog. So trying to capitalize on that, I was pitching PetSmart and Petco to do a Garth is guide dog, voiced by Eric McCormick, by the way, from Will and Grace. Anyway, so I was trying to do a Garth lookalike contest in the stores. He's a black lab in the book, but a yellow lab in the movie, because yellow labs film better, see their expressions better. So I thought that was a genius idea. Bring your lab into the store, brings in foot traffic to the store, have a movie poster, QR code to enter. You capture information about all these people so you can send them a reminder on their phone, watch the movie. Small prize in each store would have been brilliant. And I got some traction with it, but I don't think it's gonna, but it's now, I'm just some crazy lady who PetSmart's corporate headquarters are here in Phoenix. So I took some signed books, and you can't walk into any corporate headquarters anymore. They're all gated up, but I was managed to talk to people on my way. Do you like dogs? Do you like reading? Here's this book. Okay, well, you can go in and talk to the next gatekeeper. And so I just kept going. And they finally accepted a book to give to their chief marketing officer. Um, and then I turned it on over to Hallmark, which is far more appropriate because I'm just some crazy author lady. Um, I think with more time, with more lead time, this would have happened. So I think it's no matter what you're doing, think about the other constituencies other than just readers that might be interested, and uh, try to work with them, try to get them on board to your project.
So with the TV interviews, the podcast
Yes,
interviews, have you seen, and I know this is kind of hopefully a long tail for this.
yes, I
And,
have.
as we're talking, we're still a week out from
Yeah.
the airing, I guess more than a week out. But have you seen in all that publicity that you've done any bumps or differences in sales?
Yeah. So my sales of Guiding Emily have doubled, which is just astounding. Because when I was doing the Christmas Club, which was my Christmas novella that was made into a Hallmark movie in 2019, I was thinking, oh man, this is going to be great. I'm going to sell books like crazy. I don't think I sold a single book from that.
Hmm.
And I took out a $5,000 banner ad on the Christmas Club's dedicated page on the Hallmark website. And I had it. They were so kind to me because I didn't have a graphics department, their graphics department, just for funsies. And being kind to me, designed a great looking banner ad and all of that. So I plunked down my $5,000 and didn't sell a book. I think what I didn't realize was I was competing with Campbell's Soup because they had a product placement for green bean casserole. So they had mushroom soup, and were paying a whole lot for those ads. So lesson learned, be careful who you're in the sandbox with.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's really good to see. I mean, to know that all of the work that's going in and that is at the
Yeah.
expense of being able to write right now is
Oh,
having dividends for book one in a series
yes.
that has more books. And you got to assume, I don't know if you keep up with your, read through about what percentage
Oh,
of
yeah.
people go on, but
Yeah. It's really high. It's really high. It's nice. And I think this time this movie will continue to increase book sales and read through. I'm very encouraged with that. But you're right. You're not doing other things. And when I wasted $5,000, I'm not rich. $5,000 I mean, I wasn't eating cat food as a result of it, but that hurts. So I guess I'm a person who will take a chance, roll them dice, and sometimes they don't come out. But have I ever been sorry I tried? No. I'm one of those, I want to leave it all on the field. I am working like mad. It takes a lot of time to send out 500 individual emails. I felt like my eyes are going to fall out of my head. Um, but when I am done with all of this in September, I will have done my best.
that's really just impressive. Like all the way around, all the
Thank you.
work that's going into it, super
Yeah,
impressive.
thank you.
Um, well, similar in some regard, in that I have also done not very much writing. Um, August will have been the slowest writing month for me this year. I think that I
Um,
I don't think I have 5,000 words that I've written, somewhere around 4,500 for the month, and that has just come in a few clumps here and there. But work has been very, very busy. And then in like this morning, I got up at right after 5 and, got coffee and immediately started working
Yeah.
on, work stuff because
Yeah.
that's just where I'm at right now. That's what has to get done because there's just a lot of fires going. And so that means all the writing stuff is set to the side for now. And I'll hopefully get back to it in September. Or I will. It just may not be every single day, like is my preference. So,
Yeah.
you know, we'll see. Um,
You
we
are
have
one
been,
hardworking guy. You
well,
really
we have been able to record and release starting in August. We had our summer where it was kind of hit or miss a little bit. And then we've released one every week this month in August and have the same thing scheduled for September. So, I guess I could have, it's a choice about how to use that creative time. And there's only so much of it.
yeah.
And this is one of my priorities. And so we made this happen. And then, the writing will come too. I'm still querying um, the that fifth novel that I wrote. And the frustrating thing about querying is you send all the emails out and then it's a waiting game. And I am not a patient person. I
Yeah.
can force myself to be when necessary. And this is one of those times. And so now I've I've continued to do research. I get the publishers marketplace daily emails about deals and look at that to see if there are agents in categories that I want to submit to that I haven't yet. Um, and so, I'm doing that and just waiting on emails and busing. I have it all going to one particular email inbox.
Yeah.
And so every time I get an email in that inbox that is not a response to a query, I fuss at that email for alerting me because none of it is important to me as that. So, um,
Yeah.
other than that, it's just been work and a little bit of podcasting and a little bit less even of writing. So
Can I ask, did you query Marshall Lyon in LA?
I don't know, but I'll write it down.
I
I've
want,
got a spreadsheet, of course.
yeah, of course
Um,
you do. I want you to do that. I think they're really good and I think they rep your work.
that sounds familiar, but
Probably
um,
a big
I'm
deal.
writing it down. So we'll see. It's a whole querying is this whole thing unto itself that occupies so much time. And that's been part of the thing that has
Yes.
taken up time that would otherwise be writing. I started on,
Yeah.
well, I sent out the first email July 16th. I started sooner than that, compiling my list and, all that, doing research about who I wanted to send things out to, and have just been in those first 2 weeks sent out a bunch and then a few here and there. But people talk about getting your query letter ready, but everybody's submission guidelines are so different,
Yes.
and want
It's
it in different ways that there is no like get your query letter ready.
yeah,
It's
it's changed. Yeah.
And then what people want along with it is, some people will want a first chapter, some people want the first 10 pages or the first 50 pages. And so you just have to have all of those things ready. And I'm not just doing a shotgun approach to it. I'm picking the people that I think would be a good fit. Whether they think that is a different matter, but I'm also not putting all my eggs in this basket because I know that if I don't get one of the people that I want, I can
Yeah.
do this myself.
Sure.
I have business reasons that we've talked about before that I'm interested in doing it this time around. But I'm not just gonna, you see horror stories about people whose agents aren't a good fit for them. And we've talked to folks on here about it. And so I'm not settling for just any agent. And because I know that if it's not someone that I think is a good fit, then I can do it myself.
Right. Absolutely. Better than, yeah, you have to get somebody who would be better than you, and you're very good at it. So that's the rub. Yeah, it used to be back in the good old days when you just mail stuff out, and even early email days, it was fairly easy to customize to do one stock email and send it out, but now it's a time-consuming one-off to reach each agent, and it probably is cutting down on the number of submissions they get, or perhaps on the number that they will really open. Maybe they have assistants who screen them for things that look like nobody's taken the time to customize, and they just dump them in the trash. So maybe that'll increase your chances because you're doing it the right way.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
Let's start in on the topic that we planned to talk about. With I guess we can talk both about our early writing influences and what, I kind of made a list here about what it was about some of these folks that drew me to them more than just appreciating it as a reader, about someone who has affected my writing. Let's start. You want to start, or you want me to jump in?
You go ahead and jump in because I think you're going to have a more interesting answer than I will.
So, in my 20s, starting in college, I did a lot of reading, and I loved then more than I think I would now Ernest Hemingway and John Steinbeck. And they, I wrote a lot of poetry, particularly in my teenage years and early and mid 20s. And I, this isn't something I say proudly, but in my 20s, it was very important for me to people that people know that I was smart. That's just, it was a pride thing. And as I've gotten older, certainly I don't care nearly as much about that. But my writing style was very self important and verbose and pretentious. And, I think some of the people that I was reading back then and some of that older writing style is very much reflected in that. But as I've gotten older, in particularly since 2016, when I really started, I got back into writing after a bit of an absence. I will read somebody like Stephen King, and the versatility that he writes with in different genres is something that is, because he has science fiction and fantasy and horror and his nonfiction book, and the ability to write in so many different genres well, and things that, like Billy Summers, that came out a couple of years ago, was just a suspense thriller novel that didn't have any of those elements in it, is really incredible. And then for Ray Bradbury and Neil Gaiman, their ability to create a mood in their story and an atmosphere that, and sometimes it's dread and sometimes it's whimsical. I I still haven't figured out how to do that in a way that they are able to do it in. I've never seen anybody do it like those guys that just, I don't know how to describe it other than a mood and an atmosphere that encompasses the book. And I can't put my finger on how they do it. And then I'll read a book by Blake Crouch, who is a science fiction author, and he writes so concisely, and all of the spare parts are stripped off of it. And it's just a story that is what it is, and it moves forward quickly. And, I just, his terse may be the best way to write, describe it, ability to write like that. Those are all just folks that, as I read, I'm trying to absorb not just the story that I'm reading, but the way that they're telling it, because I have, I like different parts of what they do.
Well, yes, that is so interesting to hear you talk about Hemingway and yeah, Steinbeck. Um, so I think, I started writing fiction much later in my life. Did a lot of technical writing as a lawyer. So when I started writing fiction, one of the authors that is well, I read widely in crime and thriller and mystery and all that kind of stuff. Loved Agatha Christie, grew up reading her books, under the covers with a flashlight, that kind of thing. Um, I love Rosamund Pilcher's later novels, Shell Seekers, and after that, she was a romance writer, sort of was one of the pioneers, I think, in women's fiction. And then I loved Alex, and I still do love Alexander McCall Smith's Ladies #1 Detective Agency series. So when I started writing fiction, I approached it with my avatar in mind. And my avatar was a woman getting on a plane in LA, flying to New York, wanted something to take her mind off the flight. But when she landed in New York, she was busy, wouldn't be able to pick up, needed to just finish it. So that's what I did with Coming to Rosemont. And I loved the sense of community and caring for each other kind of characters that Rosamund Pilcher wrote. So I wanted to have a world like that. And I also wanted, it's like the #1 Ladies Detective Agency. To me, Alexander McCall Smith is just work, is replete with kindness and goodness. And sort of dials back the time, even though they're set contemporary, and my Rosemont series is set contemporary, it dials the feeling tone back to a simpler, less complicated, less attached to your cell phone and your social media, and responding to texts within 2 minutes, or somebody on the other end is wondering, where are you? So that's what my writing tried to take from those sources. I personally have very little patience with description, and I fall down on that. I mean, when I edit, I always have to go back through and add description to my work, because I don't have much patience for. I was reading a whole bunch of English women's fiction, and I mean, that will, 4 or 5 pages of walking along on a path and describing all the birds that are tweeting. No. Skip, find it, get to the end of that. Similarly, I'm now listening. I'm going to get a lot of, probably get, books thrown at me, at my head. I'm listening to A Gentleman in Moscow, which has been a huge bestseller. And the author's turn of phrase is brilliant. I catch myself all the time thinking, God, that's beautifully written, and how smart is he, and how good is his research? But I keep thinking, oh, for goodness sake, get on with the story. Enough of all this introspection. Let's just get some plot going on. And I know I'm unusual in that, because it's a big bestseller. Have you read Gentleman in Moscow yet?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, well, you might at some point in time, and the narrator, the audiobook's wonderful, and the narrator is just charming as all get out. He's got an accent, so I'm always in on that. So that's kind of how, but I keep looking and reading things and looking at other authors I admire. Kelly Coates Gilbert, we've had her on. Oh my God, is she a beautiful women's fiction writer? I'm not even worthy. She is such a good descriptor, and every time she creates character with something, I'm like, yeah, I know that person. I know that person. So she's another one to look at.
Well, let's talk about how, we had these influences, and I think, how they have, affected, or how your writing has evolved as you've been doing it. I know that I talked about in those early years, mine was very self-important and verbose. But then as I went to grad school where I got a master's in history, so I did a ton of writing there, and that's not creative writing, but whatever writing you're doing is developing your writing style. So between that and then law school, where there's a ton of writing, and practicing law, where there's a lot of writing, then in 2016 is when I started my law blog. And out of that, I wrote 3 books about law practice. And I think it was really in those years from 2016 to 2020, as I was writing regularly. And it's not fiction, but it was developing my writing style and how I wanted to communicate this information and tell the anecdotes that I was telling as a part of that, that really, you know, I took, all of these influences that existed for years, and it got to the point where I wasn't consciously adopting anything anymore. It was, this is just how I write. And so in that same time frame around 2018, I started trying to write one novel and, set it aside, and started trying to write another and set it aside. So by the time late 2020 comes around and I write my first full novel, like, I just know who I am as a writer because I've written so many hundreds of thousands of words at that point. And I know, that my book is light on description. They're heavy on dialogue. In some ways, they're kind of Spartan in that way. Like you said, I have to go back and add description as well. I want to make sure to include enough, emotional elements and sensory elements, but it is very fast moving and forward driven, and not taking a lot of time to just take in the things for their own sake. And the dialogue is quippy and witty and bantery. And, I'm starting on my sixth one now, and I hopefully those things have continued to improve. But I don't think the nature of my writing has really substantively changed in the last 3 or 4 years. This is who I am. This is how I write. It took a long time to figure it out and strip out all the things that aren't beneficial, and don't serve the writing. Um, but I continue to, as I read, and particularly lately, it's been more audiobooks than anything else. And I hear things when I'm listening to an audiobook that I don't know if I would have perceived the same way in reading. Um, but like you were talking about turns of phrase and things like that, when I'm listening, I'm like, oh man, I really like the way they did that. And I don't think I am very often trying to assimilate that into what I'm doing, but I know it makes its way in there, subconsciously as you go along too. So I want to continue to evolve and do things better. But I think that who I am is who I am at this point, and I don't see that changing the voice that I write with. How about you?
Yeah, I think, yeah, you write page turners, and I wouldn't like, I personally, as a reader, I'm sure your readers don't want you to change that because it's very accessible. Um, yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, I'm always looking to improve myself. Like I say, Kelly Goes Gilbert has encouraged me to kind of up my game. But I have a voice, and I was so pleased in a review on my ninth Rosemont book, which came out in July. One of the reviews said something about at the end about, if you haven't read her series, check it out, whatever, and enjoy the Barbara Hinske experience. Oh my goodness. So I printed it out and highlighted it, and I've got it in I keep a little stack of encouragement things because
Mm,
when you're out there, of course, there's no shortage of people willing to tell you what they don't like and
yeah.
what you should have done. Yeah.
Well, I think that's great that you have an identifiable brand of,
Yeah.
when you come to a Barbara Hinske novel, this is what you can expect.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel good about that. And hearing you talk, I want you to at least look at the sample or listen to the sample of Gentleman in Moscow, and then tell me what you think, if it drives you as crazy as it does me.
Okay. I'm writing it
If
down.
I'm only Philistine, because I didn't hate Where the Crawdads Sing. I mean, another like owned the bestseller list for years is still there. So I probably should be, stripped of all my credentials for not liking crawdads, but I didn't. So there you go.
Well, it's just a matter of, so much of that is a matter of preference as the reader or listener. And just because it worked for however many hundreds of thousands or millions of readers doesn't mean it's a good fit for you. I recently listened through a couple of best-selling thriller novels and just came to the conclusion that like I'm not the reader for that. It has lots and
Yeah.
lots of readers, but it's not for me.
Um, yeah, I
What?
never like a story where somebody gets murdered because they had it coming. I mean, as lawyers, we're like, no, there are legal channels. We don't get to go about offing people because they had it coming.
Yeah. So
No
this
women's
weekend
fiction.
I
Yeah.
was painting, and my the rest of my family was out of town, so I had like painting a room, not painting for fun, and so I had all weekend
Oh
to
heavens,
listen
no,
to.
you never relax. We know this about you. Anyway.
Well, it needed to be
Yeah.
done, and so
Yeah.
I listened to audiobooks while I was painting, and I read or listened to A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher, and it is like the first, I don't know, 2/3 of the novel is this whimsical, fantastical story. It's a ghost story, but it's whimsical and witty and clever, and then it gets kind of dark in the last third of it. And I just loved the entire experience of listening to that book, and I loved the main character who was the viewpoint character, and it was his first person story, and it was just so engaging. It moved quickly, and it was just this sense of whimsy and lightness that evolved into, you know, some some darkness. And it was just such a good experience of reading that book. And now uh, I've got to. It was I was did it through my library through the Libby app. I'm gonna have to go find
Yeah.
more of their books because I I want more of that.
Excellent. Excellent.
Um, what about, is there anything that you're reading lately that you have just really enjoyed and recommend?
Yes, two things. Well, obviously, lessons in chemistry. I mean, everybody's reading that, and it's on Netflix next week. I thought that was brilliant. And another novel, I can't remember the author's name, Remarkably Bright Creatures. And one of the viewpoint, first person viewpoint characters is an octopus.
Oh,
Hello.
interesting.
His name is Marcellus. He is charming and is voiced, I listened to it, and is voiced by someone with this very patrician accent. It's so fun. So I was all in for that.
Well, I think I've been surrounded by people writing animals with viewpoint characters. I mean, certainly you have Garth. You
Yeah.
mentioned Marcellus the octopus there. And I was listening this week to the Writers Inc. podcast, and their interview for the week was an author, and she had written a cat as one of her viewpoint characters. And it's this surly, snarky cat, like you would expect a cat to be. And so that just seems to be in the zeitgeist right now. So, but I think that's a good point for us to bring this episode to a close. Um, we have a lot of new listeners since our interview with Savannah Gilbo. And so that has been really great for this podcast. And so if y'all would take a minute to subscribe, leave a rating or review on whatever podcast service you're listening to. If you're watching on YouTube, leave a like, leave a comment if you want. That's really great for us and the algorithms to figure out how to share this with more people. So thanks.
Thank you.